upon. Tuesday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern, live. Malliard.com. Malliard.com. One more thing before we start. Let me turn it over to my friend that you may know from Ancient Aliens and Curse of Oak Island and many other things, Robert Clotworthy.
On the Malliard Report, the views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the show are solely those of the hosts and guests, and not necessarily of Evergreen Podcasts, KillerPodcast.com, sponsor or affiliate, or any other individual or group. On the Malliard Report, the views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the show are solely those of the hosts and guests, and not necessarily of Evergreen Podcast, KillerPodcast.com, sponsor or affiliate, or any other individual or group.
I want to welcome everybody in this evening. We got a special show here for you tonight. This is something I've been looking forward to for, I guess, the last month since we decided we were going to do this, and so here we are tonight. My guest tonight is Dr. Kimberly Rackley, who is an expert in spiritual healing, easy for me to say, psychic and paranormal investigations, holds a doctorate in metaphysical sciences, and is an ordained metaphysical minister and practitioner and theta healer, Reiki master, hypnotherapist. Jeez, Peach, got all these fancy words in here. Spiritual DNA activator, blogger, author. Kim, it's been too long since you've been on. It's been too long since you've been on, but how are you doing?
I've been doing great. Been busy, but great.
Well, that's good to hear. It's good to hear your voice. 2017 is the last time you were on, which is just ridiculous to me. Jeez, Peace. Yeah. Time flies when you're having fun. So, my co-host tonight, which is something I never have said on this program before, so he's the first one, is my son, Skyler. Skyler, how are you doing tonight?
Good.
Good. So, go ahead and ask him your first question. We'll kind of work through this together, but I want you to take the lead on tonight. So, go ahead.
Yeah. So, what was your first experience with the paranormal?
My very first experience was when I was 7. My mom was in the hospital, and we had just come home, and I was the first one in the door. And I saw my grandfather laying on the floor in the kitchen, and I turned around to yell for my dad, and my grandfather was also standing in front of the door, and I could see straight through him. That was my very first experience. Yeah, and no one believed me, of course, that I could see Papa in 2 different places. No one believed me, but that's okay.
You want to ask another one?
How does communicating with spirits work for you?
How does what?
Communicating with spirits work for you?
How does communicating with spirits work for you?
Well, it just happens. I'm lucky in the fact that I have all 4 psychic abilities. And when someone wants to talk to me, I either first see them, hear them, or sense them. And it's the same thing with an investigation. I usually sense them first, and then, I talk to them and tell them it's okay to appear or speak or whatever, and they mentally communicate with me, even though I can hear their voices. They're coming through my head, rather than, that's why no one else can hear them or see them when I can. So it's like a telepathic mental communication. But, yeah, it just happens. It's pretty spontaneous. And when I do a mediumship reading, I just kind of lift myself up out of myself, and I focus on the person's name and their birth date. And if they're available to communicate with me, they'll communicate with me. And they'll show me images in my mind. And sometimes I can see them outside of myself, near the person I'm giving the reading for, or just in my mind. And they'll show me images, and they'll give me feelings, and sometimes phrases or specific words. So it kind of all works together. I never know which one's going to come through first, the seeing, the feeling, or the hearing. It's whatever the spirit's comfortable with.
Go to your next one. I know your next question, so this is good.
How do you shut it off when it becomes overwhelming?
Have I what?
How do you shut it off when it becomes overwhelming?
I ask them. You can ask them. See, what everyone has to remember is, well, there are some pushy spirits, but mostly they're the earthbound ones. If it's the ones that have already crossed over, they understand that you're alive and your focus is this world, not theirs. But if it's an earthbound spirit, sometimes you have to be forceful and tell them to leave you alone. And they have to remember that you're alive and they're not, so you're in control. So I remind them that I'm in control, not them. And if that doesn't work, then I call in Archangel Michael, who takes care of them for me. Or Archangel Zadkiel, who is in charge of lost souls. So that usually works for me. So, and then if that doesn't work, I use the phrase, the power of Jesus places you where you belong. You're in the light of Jesus. But sometimes that doesn't work because not every wayward spirit is Christian. So they don't get the concept of Jesus, being powerful. But most of the time it does work.
Yeah.
But you can just tell them, hey, dull it down. I don't have time for you right now, or I've told you all I can. I've helped you all I can. And they usually respect that. Of course, if you're dealing with an entity, they're kind of a little different than spirits, and sometimes they need a little more convincing.
So I also have Mrs. Duck on the line, so she has something she wants to add to this conversation at this point. So let's get her up here.
Okay.
How are you doing, Kim?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing good. So I kind of wanted to add the reason why Skyler is asking you these specific questions is because Skyler's been dealing with a lot of noise. He has some spirits that just kind of won't let him be. And then the overwhelm thing comes from lately when we are near a cemetery or a hospital, which, we go to children's a lot. He gets a lot of background chatter is kind of what we've talked about. There's constant trying to communicate with him, even when he's trying to shut it off.
Right. So his main sense right now is clairaudience, hearing them rather than seeing or sensing them.
He can sense and see as well. He'll get He'll get images, and one of the things he was going to ask you about is an animal. There's a particular cat spirit that hangs around him right now.
Oh. Usually animal spirits don't mean any harm. They're lonely and they just want company. And some of them don't understand why they're still here. But with the animal, the rainbow bridge, as we call it with animals most of the time, or it could be the light, either way, you can ask for it to be opened, and he could ask the cat to go into the light or across the rainbow bridge with others of his kind, and he should go. So the cat might be stuck and not know why, so that may help. And then I still to this day have the same problem that Skyler has, going to hospitals, funeral homes, and cemeteries and stuff, and you can't really dull them all the time, but you can protect yourself before you go to those places with a tube of white light. And you just, ask for it to descend upon you. And anything that is harmful, you can also ask to be reflected back and away from yourself. And that's how I handle it. And then basically you just have to ignore them. When they're talking to you and won't be quiet, you just literally have to ignore them. But usually when I put up the white light or the tube of light, they know to back off. But I've also had 30 years of experience. And I understand where Tyler's coming from, because when I was young, the same thing would happen to me, and it was very confusing. And no one would believe me. I'm glad that he has you and Jim. You believe him, and you know what he's going through. Well, I didn't have that. But the best thing to do when you go to those places is Skyler needs to learn protection exercises and the tube of white light to keep the spirits from attaching themselves or communicating with him. And he can also tell them if a bunch are coming at him at one time, he can remind them he's in charge and it's one at a time. And they have to listen to you. They're supposed to listen to you. And if they don't, then you call in the big guns like Archangel Michael or your spirit guide or Archangel Zadkiel. That's my process anyway.
He's still in the learning process, trying to understand what is all going on with him. He like I said, he sees things, he can hear it, and he can sense it. I joke that the cat is hanging around because, you know, we have many pets in our house, so they feel the cat feels safe here. But because, I mean, we're up to 16 pets now, so. And, I mean, Skyler's always been, since he was little, he was somebody who had auditory and visual things happen. He scared my mom a few times because, you know, like the one time he told her that she was in trouble to go to the living room because her mom is looking for her. My grandma passed away when I was 16. So, you know, telling my mom that her mom was waiting for her in the living room really creeped my mom out.
Yeah.
And at night, he used to not sleep, so we would go visit my mom at work. And she was a nurse, and she worked at TCU Transitional Care. So it was open 24/7. And the one night, he pulled an oxygen tank in front of a room, and he told my mom, "All better now." And my mom called me about 2 hours later and told me that, like, shortly after we had left, the person in that room went into full respiratory distress, and they wound up putting oxygen on them. So,
wow.
Yeah, and one of the nurses, he got a reputation up there, and one of the nurses saw him coming one day, and she stood in front of the room and said, "I'm not ready," and it was her grandma in the room. And Skyler said, "Not yet," and he walked away. So
that's a gift right there.
Yeah, so I mean, he's always had a little bit of something. I think for a while he kind of shut it out, and now he's opened back up to it. So that's why he was interested to kind of ask some questions tonight.
Well, good, because I understand how he feels. And I would speak out like that too. Like, I always knew when someone was close to crossing over, and of course no one wants to hear that of their loved ones. And when I was young, I didn't realize that. So what I had to realize was that you and the soul, the person who's crossing over, can know, but the family doesn't necessarily want to know. So I just kept quiet for a long time. And still, you just have to discern what kind of people you're dealing with, if they're open, what their beliefs are, or whatever. Because still today, I can tell when to approach someone and say, okay, maybe